So this is our goal for the next couple of weeks, thinking about these technical delivery objectives. We're also thinking about, again, in a new part of the domain, we did this with the request response cycle. How do we learn something new, right? And as always, at the beginning of the week, there'll be new things. We have to grapple with this, and it will become easier in time. Not only are we going to be learning something new, but then thinking about the tools that we're going to use. How do we get visibility in how our databases are working? We'll be pairing on a challenge over the next, pairing on a project over the next couple of weeks called the Bookmark Manager project. So this is what we're going to be pairing in the afternoons for the next 2 weeks. All right. Our module challenge is Chitter. All right. So let's have a quick look at both of these, and I'll talk more about databases in a second. This is the module challenge. It's not due next week, but it's due in 2 weeks' time. All right. You probably will be able to get a start on it this coming weekend, but there'll be some things you'll have to wait until we get to it in the second week. All right. So it's not due a week from now, but it's due 2 weeks from now. There's no intermediary challenge this weekend, but you might want to get a start on this over the weekend. The requirements you can read through, but it's going to be essentially a small clone of Twitter, a very simple version of this, or any other public message board where there's one wall and people can post messages to it. So this is the challenge. There's a few more sort of specific details about being able to post, being able to have the specific order, be able to see the time, and then some logging in and logging out and sign up. So this stuff we'll do next week, sign up and log in. At the moment, we've got to focus our attention this week on how do we persist data? How do we then read data back out of the database? So that's what we're going to be doing this week. And then we'll use those ideas thinking about user registrations and things like that. So this is the challenge that's due in 2 weeks. You can always start whenever you want, but we're due in 2 weeks' time. This is the project that we'll all pair on over the next couple of weeks. Again, there's no pairing today, but we'll start pairing from tomorrow afternoon in cycles of 2 afternoons. The project that we're going to pair on is an application that can store bookmarks. It's going to be a lot of fun. You can add tags to your bookmark, so you can sort of like give descriptions about them, and then you can search your bookmarks to quickly find things that you want. And then the last part of this will be to be able to sign up and log in, so each user will have their own bookmarks. So these are the requirements for this project. And in order to be able to do this, we have to store data. We have to persist data using a database. The first part of today is going to be setting up, and we probably won't do much more than just playing around with database queries today. All right, this project won't start until tomorrow. So we're going to come back to the start out section tomorrow, but this is going to be the project. Let's have a think about what the work we've done so far, and where does database, or where do databases fit into this picture? So we've so far seen this picture a number of times. Right, it's a diagram of a classic client server relationship. Client sends requests, and our applications over here handle the request and send back a response. So this should be by now very familiar to you. The browser is a special kind of client, and we've been able to write Express applications on the right-hand side. We've been able to thinking about in the sort of MVC architecture. I'm going to sort of draw it this way, I guess, where this is the controller part. It takes in requests and then it gives back a response. And if we want to be a little bit more specific, we can separate this part here, where the first part is like a router, where it takes the request and forwards it to the right place. And the controller action is where it sort of gets information that it needs. At the moment, we've been dealing with getting information from a view, or getting data from other parts of our application. So we can call this M for the moment. All right, controller asks of you to like figure out what the HTML is going to look like, and then it adds it to the response body, then sends the response back to the client. So the main thing doing work here is the controller. It gets a request that's been routed to it, and then figures out what information it needs and sends back the response body to the client. Now, currently, if you kill your app, any data that's stored on your application gets lost. We've been able to persist data in between requests using either sort of higher scope at the level of the node application, or within the Express application using app locals, variables stored within the app itself. But we want to be able to get to a point where we can persist data outside of the application. And so we need to add something to this diagram. We need to add a way that our application can store data and then read it back out. So we have to add some kind of connection here to be able to persist data. Now, if let's zoom out outside of like sort of Express applications or web frameworks or anything like that. If you think in your own sort of life so far, how have you been able to store data if you wanted to be able to like do some work and then come back to it later, having turned your computer off? Like where have you stored that information? In your brain? Is that someone tapped their head? Good luck with that. As the years go by, it may be less and less reliable. You have on your computer, you want to be able to save things, right? And it gets saved into some kind of file, and your computer can hold that information. So something, it's not necessarily a trick answer, but it's maybe a more straightforward answer, is we've been able to persist data by using a computer's file system. So a file system, at its core, is just a way to organize data. All right, we organize data into groups of data. And what would you give? And what is a group of data? What have you been using? If we group data, what name could we give that so far? If we think about file systems,
a database.
Not yet. We're not worried about database.
Just maybe a folder or something.
Yeah, exactly. So a file system is a way to organize data. It helps you do this. You give a name to a bit of data called a file. All right, borrows from like this more physical analog version of storing data, right? So you can have a file, give it a name, and there's also probably going to be some other sort of metadata about how long it is and when it was created and things like that. But at the end of the day, it's just a bunch of data stored on your hard drive, and a file system manages that. It gives it a name so you can access any data that's attached to that name. And you can then group files, as you've been doing before, so even more data together under another name called a directory. It's all just data, all right? And there's this abstract layer on top of it so we can make sense of it. So a file system helps you manage data by grouping it into files, then grouping files into directories. And this is a separate system on your computer. So if you were, for example, as a user, let's say you are over here, and you're opening up a word processing application, let's say using Microsoft Word. You do some edits to it, and you save it, and then it will save it to your file system. Then when you want to open up that file in Microsoft Word, it reads from the file system so you can see it. So you have over on the left-hand side a user, on the right-hand side you have the file system. This is a very simplistic version, but this is essentially what's happening underneath the hood. There's a few more actors involved in this process. We've got to be able to translate the keyboard input or the mouse input to be able to then do things with it. So there's another layer to this. There is how do you manage the hardware. So there's going to be some operating system mechanics involved here. But at its simplest, you have applications that deal with a user, and then it can access your file system if you're trying to store data. And it's this connection here that is going to be the same kind of thing that we're after. We want to write one of these that accesses something that stores data. So if you think about this in the context of our application, we're going to have a app on this side that's going to interact with some kind of file system over here. And this is going to be a special kind of file system called a database. And we still have to get these to talk to each other. Now, one of the main differences between a file system and a database is the way that they manage writing to and reading to files, and the way that they store that data. So if you want to query text or files in your file system, and you have a lot of files, it's going to take a long time because it's not organized in the same way. So a file system is quite useful to just organize your files and your directories, but it's not useful if you want to query them at speed. And that's why you want a more specialized way to store data using a database. Now there are two main kinds of database systems, and we're going to look at primarily one of them for the moment. And we're going to look at what we call relational databases. The other kind, surprisingly, are called non-relational databases. But again, I want you to have in your picture, I want to have in your head a picture of essentially a fancy file system. That's what a database is. All right, we're still going to be storing data in files and folders, but you won't be able to see them as such. We're just going to be querying a database, which then manages those interactions for us. If we want to get some data back, the moment you can navigate on your terminal application, go into a directory and then show it, there's going to be a little bit more of a layer to that, but we can still do something in the same way. We can still navigate and get data back from that storage system. So we'll have to learn a way to do this, but at the end of the day, it's simply another way to store data, and it's been organized for us. Okay. So database is just a fancy file system, and a file system is just groups of data that we organize into files and directories. In this diagram over here, usually we model this with a separate diagram on the right-hand side, because there's a problem we have to solve here. So this is our database. Relational databases mostly talk in or accept queries in the format of SQL. All right, so we have to find some way to communicate using SQL. SQL stands for Structured Query Language. It is a programming language. But our application on the left-hand side here talk in Node.js. So have you had the experience trying to talk to someone in a foreign language? You have no idea how to do this. Right? It's difficult, right? So you have to find some kind of translation, some kind of map, some kind of way to say what you want to say, but in a different language. And for that, we have another tool called, or another application called a map. And this kind is called an ORM. We're going to talk about this on Wednesday. So I'm not going to worry about it just for the moment, but I just want to identify one of the problems that we'll have to encounter. We're going to, so far today, we're going to spend our time setting one of these things up and then interacting with it. All right, and then on Wednesday morning, or maybe even tomorrow morning, I can't remember what I put in the calendar. At some point, we're going to talk about how we can connect these two things together. All right. Okay. I'm receiving a call from +353. What country is that? Okay. Where am I going to go from here? So we've talked a little bit about what a file system is and what a database is. Let's go ahead and think about how we interact with them. So currently, these arrows represent something to do with in our application when it runs, some interaction with our database. But we don't need to run our Express application if we want to interact with our database. A database exists independently of our application. Right? That's why they're in two separate boxes. We can run this using Node. It's a Node.js application. We can run this independently, and we can just use this as you would any other application. So it still runs independently. So it means if I want to set one of these up, I can, and I can interact with it without needing to run a Node app, which is what we're going to do today. We're just going to see how we can set one of these up. If I want to connect to it, I still have to find a way to do this. And the first way we're going to do this is using a command line interface. All right, so you can just interact with this directly from your terminal. Another way we can do this is by using some kind of graphical interface. And you're also going to have a look at doing that. So we can still, once this is running, we can interact with it in a number of different ways. You can interact with it directly from your command line, from a sort of desktop application, or from within an Express application. There are lots of different ways we can connect to it. So let's have a look at this first one. How do we do this? I'm going to share some instructions with everyone that I want you to get on with until after lunch, which is this set here. This is, especially this first part, the setup over here is what I want everyone to do by lunchtime, and then see how far you can get having a look at some of these instructions. I'm then going to demonstrate everything straight after lunch, but I want to give everyone some time to go through setup first. So let me link this to everyone. So before I let everyone go through setup, I can access my database. Once you've installed it, you've gone through the installation process. You then run your database server, and you can access it as you might imagine by connecting to it using your command line. So once you've installed it, you'll have access to a command called PSQL. And you should be able to, once it's successful, you'll have an installation of Postgres. And then you can connect to, I don't know what, let's say, I'm going to create a database called test database. And then I'm going to connect to it. And this is essentially showing me currently what is in my database server. All right, I've connected specifically to one of my databases. I can have a look at all of my databases. And these are all the different databases that I have currently running on my database server. So if I go back to this diagram, from my interface here, I'm connected to my server, and I've got lots of individual databases that I can access. So if I wanted to connect to, let's connect to this one. And I've now connected it. I can list all of display tables, I think. I can see all the different tables that I have here. These are individual tables. And if I wanted to have a look at what was in some of these tables, I would have to then query it, all right? So this is just showing me the information at the moment. If I wanted to look inside of them, so for example, the difference between on your command line doing list, this shows you everything, and then actually looking at a specific file, you would have to then open it in your editor, for example. So I can see all the different tables inside of this database. And if I wanted to look inside of them, I would query it and say something like select everything from, let's say the users table. And this gives me a bunch of data that is currently stored in this table. So this gives me a way to access data, and this has been probably around for a little while because I probably haven't looked at this since the previous cohorts, probably about 3 months. So this is what you're gonna spend some time doing today, just getting set up, just playing around from your command line. How do you, once you've gone through the installation process, how do you create a database? How do you create then a table with some columns? How do you do some statements? And just playing around with it. I will then go through and demonstrate all of these commands again straight after lunch at 2 o'clock. There'll be no peer groups. I'll go through, I'll record it, and then you'll be doing this again this afternoon. So the focus this afternoon is being able to get through these instructions. And just so we can feel confident about working with a database from our command line. Some resources here to think about different commands, and you'll have the recording as well this afternoon. Okay. Other than that, this is all I want to be able to demonstrate for you for the moment. The task ahead of you is to go through setup, and then we'll meet again at 2 o'clock. Go through setup and then see how much else you can do, but then I'll go through and demonstrate everything after lunch. Sound good? Cool. Awesome. Thanks for the thumbs up, folks. Okie doke. Enjoy, have fun, and I will see you otherwise at 2 o'clock on this Zoom call. Ciao, ciao.